Welcome to the Ringer NFL show. I'm Robert Mays, joined as always by Kevin Clark. Kevin, how you doing, buddy?
I'm good. I am ready for the game to start.
I am ready for the game to start too, but there's a lot of time between now and then. We are once again on Radio Row. It is Thursday afternoon. Same amount of craziness, even more craziness today.
Both McCourty twins are over your right shoulder wearing Pizza Hut shirts.
Pizza Hut shirts. Somebody came in with a lot of Pizza Hut earlier.
Button-down Pizza Hut shirts.
Short sleeve button-down Pizza Hut shirts. Miles Teller and Glenn Powell were here earlier.
They did Slow News Day.
That was fun. They did Slow News Day. There's been a lot of people kind of bouncing around. Today we are doing our big preview, our big Super Bowl breakdown. We're going to talk about what the game will look like for either team to win, what the scenario will need to be if the Niners are going to win, what the scenario will need to be for the Chiefs to win. Pretty straightforward. Let's start with the Niners.
Yeah.
So as you're kind of building the case for a Niners win on Sunday, where does it begin with you?
Well, I think that both scenarios run through Patrick Mahomes. Patrick Mahomes is the best passer in the sport. There is nothing harder to defend in the sport than a perfectly thrown pass, and Patrick Mahomes throws those. So what happens? Well, the front four for the 49ers generate pressure via PFF on 44% of the rushers despite blitzing over 15% of their time. This is something we've talked about a lot this year and probably the last decade, that if you want to win a Super Bowl against a great quarterback, it's great to be able to rush four. Everybody tries to do that. Most teams fail. The Niners have built a defense where that might be possible. On the back end, you've talked this week about how good a player like Jimmy Ward is. Obviously we know what Richard Sherman is. There's a case to be made that the Niners, if they are to win, have to be able to do a better job of containing Patrick Mahomes than most teams are able to do. I mean, it is, and the reason I'm so hesitant to even talk about this is because I think there's really no way to stop Mahomes from going off. I think it's a level of degrees, and I think they can maybe limit him to 27 points, something like that.
I think that's the end goal, should be just to slow him down a little bit. You watch, I don't think they've scored fewer than 24 points outside of 2 or 3 games in his entire career.
Right.
So when he's been healthy.
And those games in the middle of the season, the bad game against the Colts, he just was banged up. And that was one of the reasons. It's funny, Greg Bishop from Sports Illustrated wrote a great story about this where he talked to Mahomes in December. I'm like, we forgot about Patrick Mahomes. I mean, I try to keep reminding everybody how good he was, during Lamar Jackson mania. But he goes on national television. They lose that game 13-19 against a Colts team that we thought was a lot better and were a lot better at that point. And that was at that point the worst game of his career. And then he has 273 yards against Houston the next week. Then he gets hurt. He's got, he only throws the ball 11 times against Denver. And then they have the Matt Moore, Chad Henne era. And I think people just sort of said, and because that coincided with Lamar Jackson's just incredible emergence, I think that we all started sleeping on the best passer in the sport and the reigning MVP. And I think that when healthy, it is really hard. We are seeing it more where, okay, he put up 31 points on the Chargers, 51 points on the Texans, 35 points on the Titans. That's him.
So if we're going to build this 24-point outcome for the Chiefs, I agree with you that I think it starts with a pass rush. It seems like an oversimplification. You have to get after good quarterbacks to slow them down, but that's a huge thing with this team because it really is, if you're looking at the strengths of the Niners roster, it's the best part. Their defensive line this season has just become completely unlocked when everyone is healthy. When I say everyone, I mean the big four guys. Dee Ford, Nick Bosa, DeForest Buckner, Eric Armstead. I talked to Chris Kasurek, their defensive line coach, for a long time this week, and we talked about two things. One, just how they changed stylistically to where they're playing this year. Mm-hmm. They're attacking. They've completely changed the wiring of these guys, and it's really allowed people like Eric Armstead to have the best season of his career. So can they use the variety of pieces they have and the flexibility of the pieces they have to be unpredictable from where they're rushing from, to use a ton of games, and to really confuse the Chiefs up front all over the place? That, to me, is going to be the key for them defensively. The other side of it is really curious what sort of coverages and what sort of distribution we're going to see with the coverages. Because this team wants to run a lot of zone defense. That's what they do well. do they go outside of themselves a little bit because they don't want to be too predictable and because Mahomes absolutely dices up zone defenses? There's no good answer
There's
here.
no, well, his rating is over 108 against both types, man or zone. Okay, so it was funny in the beginning of the week, and I fell for this too briefly, where it's like, oh man, the Niners love going zone, and he against zone, Mahomes carves them up. Well, he carves up man too.
Of course.
He carves up. That's what he does.
That's what I mean. How often?
Right.
What are you going to do? How are you going to do things that are they not expecting? You're going to play a little bit more
Right.
man on early downs. You're going to, because that's what they tend to do. They run a lot of zone defenses on early downs, and then they go to some man stuff later on. The Chiefs do an excellent job with those 3-by-1 sets with Kelce on the other side. They make it very difficult to play zone in those when they have those
Right.
looks. So that back and forth is going to be so interesting. And Joe Woods was talking this week just about how they've done a great job of mixing up the coverages this year.
Yeah.
They've been a little bit more less predictable, but I think they still want to say, if we do the stuff we do well,
Yeah.
if we sit in our zone and we do the right things,
Yep.
and we do it and we play it the way we want to, I still think that's what they want to do. So if they decide we trust the simplicity of what we do and our execution, I don't know how that's going to go, but I think that might be the route that they take.
Yeah, I'm in agreement, because I think that the hardest philosophical question that a team faces when they go into a game like the Super Bowl against a quarterback like Patrick Mahomes is, do we do what we do well?
Exactly.
Or do we try to experiment a little bit and give them a different look? One of the geniuses of the Patriots is that they're flexible enough to be able to do anything. That's why we saw them kind of switch things up. And remember, Andrew Whitworth was talking about how many different looks they got last year that they weren't expecting. I think, in general, I think you do just enough to confuse the offense and stick to a lot of what you do well, and just give them a couple of different looks where it's, okay, what are we looking at here? And just get them a little bit hesitant. I think you got to, when you have 2 weeks to prepare, you can do that sort of stuff. I think Robert Saleh is a good defensive coordinator. They've got that talent there. I think it's going to be one of the most interesting. I mean, when you have 2 play callers like this, it is really fascinating to see how the defensive coordinators react to those.
What I think that you have to do is kind of blend a level of frenzy, like just a frenzied approach up front, with something a little bit more stagnant and calm on the back end. You want your creativity, your wrinkles, all of that stuff, I think, to be in the games you're running, to be maybe in some different fronts that you're running. I think if you try to get outside of yourself in terms of coverages and what the secondary is doing, that's when you can start scrambling a little bit. So I would like to see some stuff that's really changing a lot up front and maybe staying a little bit more stagnant on the back end, where you're thinking, all right, let's limit big plays and maybe get the occasional sack, the occasional quarterback hit, bother him up front, but really trust ourselves on the back end. I think that is their best recipe. I really do.
Well, okay, so we're talking about the Niners winning here. Offensively, what happens in that scenario?
I think it's just all about misdirection and exploiting the middle of the field.
Motion.
I think it's getting those guys moving left to right, just affecting their eye discipline, having them not be quite sure what they're looking at. I do think that those linebackers and Daniel Sorensen are guys that can be taken advantage of in the right scenario. And I feel like that's what Kyle Shanahan has spent the last 2 weeks doing. How do I affect those defenders in the middle of the field? How do I get them out of where I want? How do I get them out of the voids I want to exploit?
Yep, I'm with you. The NFL put this stat out this week that the Niners obviously first in motion. The Chiefs are fourth in motion. There's going to be, and that's something Andy Reid did not do before 2018 a whole lot. He was, the Chiefs were 16th, 16th, 23rd, and 22nd in motion before 2018. So there's going to be a lot of moving parts, so to speak, before the snap on both sides of the ball.
I think the Niners game plan has to be about limiting explosive plays.
Yeah.
On defense and creating them on offense. I feel like this game is going to be so close, and I think it's going to be a little bit of a shootout. And in close games like this, you think back on 1, 2, 3 chunk plays that end up making the entire difference. Can they get one of those leak routes we've seen over the past few years where they're sending different sorts of guys on those plays? Can they get 1 or 2 to use check maybe where it looks like a lead and he ends up just slipping out up the seam and it's a 40-yard gain like we saw against Pittsburgh? They need those. They need those deceptive shot plays that they're so good at creating, I think, to keep up with the Chiefs. And I think they'll be able to get some.
Yeah, and it's interesting to me because from a defensive standpoint, we saw the Vikings were able to get a huge chunk play against Ahkello Witherspoon, and then they immediately benched him, and there really hasn't been a chunk play since on the Niners end. And so I wonder. I think Mahomes is going to get chunk plays on the other side of that ball, and I just think that it's about kind of limiting as many of those as possible, eliminating silly mistakes. I think, against the Chiefs, and it's funny because one of the lessons that we've learned this year is that so many of the things that we have valued for 100 years turns out they're still important. Things like tackling.
Sure.
Things like, okay, Patrick Mahomes only gets sacked 3.3% of the time. Getting him on the ground if you touch him. Things like that, which sounds so stupid and obvious. Like those are important in this game.
I would be really curious what kind of Travis Kelce game it is.
Yep.
Because that's what I feel like the Chiefs are going to have to go to. Against those zone defenses, I think that the Niners do such a good job of limiting you down the field. I think they're really going to try to take that stuff away. And if they're worried about how they're being threatened vertically, can Kelce just start picking you apart underneath? Because I think he can. So if the Niners have some sort of plan for how just to address that, for if they're running us off, how do we stop him from just chewing us up? That can be his biggest question for them outside of Mahomes.
I've been surprised by how much pushback, and it's not a lot, but I've gotten some significant pushback on assuming, from my perspective, because I'm still assuming it, that George Kittle is better than Travis Kelce. There is a Kelce hive on the internet that I was not aware of.
What is the argument?
I don't know.
I understand. I mean, I think it depends
understand.
on what you value.
Well, some of the PFF guys think that too. I did their podcast yesterday, and one of them was arguing that
that's a dissenting opinion over there.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I think it was Eric who was like, I actually think that Kelce's better.
I don't think that, but it's also I just stylistically appreciate George Kittle.
I am in agreement.
They're very different
PFF
players.
Has George Kittle as the best player in football.
The single best player in football.
The single best player in football. So
which
it stands to reason that he's the best tight end.
You're not going to hear any arguments
from
me this year. He was absolutely incredible.
Also, the blocking and
that's the reason.
Yeah.
I just think they're also. I think both of those guys speak to what these teams are.
Yeah.
They're such reflections of their offensive identities because with Kelce, he's a receiver. That's what he does. He's lining up pretty much as a receiver all the time.
Uh-huh.
He really helps dictate whether it's man or zone before the play even starts. He is such a distillation of what they want to be. And then Kittle's the same thing for the Niners, but because he's an opposite type of player. Because you don't know whether it's going to be a run or a pass.
Yeah.
That's the thing. He makes them so unpredictable because he can do each at an extremely high level.
I saw Tony Gonzalez yesterday, and somebody was asking him about Kittle. And he said the thing that he couldn't believe was that Kittle gave a quote that if he never caught a pass, he'd be fine with everything. And Tony Gonzalez,
that's not how Tony Gonzalez played.
Tony Gonzalez was like, come on, man, you want to catch something. So I
honestly don't know if that's true with George Kittle.
So I just wanted to loop and the tight end discussion there. I just thought that was a very funny way to look at things. I actually do not think if Travis Kelce didn't catch balls, he'd be happy.
Well, what else would he do if he wasn't catching passes?
Yeah.
I think if George Kittle caught one pass a game, he'd be good to go. I honestly don't think he'd care.
I think
just so he could have a chance to run over
somebody.
somebody.
His dad was an offensive lineman. I think he could be okay. I think he would if he started his life over again and was an offensive lineman. I think.
If George Kittle gained 30 pounds right now, he'd be an All-Pro left tackle.
Yeah.
I mean, I legitimately believe
if he lost 20 pounds, he'd be an All-Pro running back, fullback.
All right, let's get to the other side of the ball. As you said, I think, or not the other side of the ball. Let's get to the Chiefs. Let's get to the case for why the Chiefs would win. Like you said, this begins and ends with Mahomes. I think that top to bottom, the Niners roster is better than the Chiefs roster. They have a better 53, but Mahomes is the best player in this game. And I think, again, even if it seems like an oversimplification, it may just come down to that.
Yep. That's it. I mean, that's it. You have good players, and it's almost like basketball. It's like who has the best guys on the court, and then those guys are just going to win. And I think that is when you have such a talented, when you have two talented rosters, that is sort of how these things work. Yeah. And these are two of the best rosters in football. That doesn't always happen in the Super Bowl, where I think, along with these are probably, I think you throw the Ravens in there. I think you're looking at
those
two
are the three
of the
best teams.
Yeah,
yes.
two of the best three, and they obviously ran into a Derrick Henry buzzsaw. Derrick Henry, is he still behind me? He is no longer behind me, but I don't want to get in his way or anything like that. So I was worried about it. That's kind of what happens when you have talented rosters. And that's why when we were talking about X Factors and stuff earlier in this week, I prefaced it by saying, I don't think this is an X Factor game. I think it's a superstar game. And I think that I think that this is going to come down to Patrick Mahomes making a pass, or George Kittle running four people over, or Deebo Samuel doing the same thing, or Kyle Shanahan, who is a superstar in a different field, scheming up some incredible play action stuff or motion. So I think that this is a superstar-driven game, and I think we're going to see it on Sunday.
I think so too. And we didn't really talk about the Niners. You mentioned Deebo Samuel. I think is interesting. We talk about how they've really leaned on the running game during the playoffs. I don't think that's this kind of game. I think that they're going to need to make plays, big chunk plays in the play action game over just running the ball consistently. I think that's going to be part of what they do, but I don't think I would not be surprised whatsoever if the Chiefs came out and just said, we're playing base defense. We are not going to let you run the ball for 6 yards of carry. That would not surprise me at all, because we saw what happened when when the Packers didn't play that way. And they came out and said, all right, we're going to play nickel even when you're in that base package. And if you want to run the ball, I guess you're just going to be able to. I don't think the Chiefs are going to do that. So I think the Chiefs stopping the run and then daring Garoppolo to beat them is the first part of their defensive game plan. Do they line up and say, we are not going to put the players in the field to make this easy for you? That's where it starts. And I also think that they need guys like Tyrann Mathieu to make plays in the middle of the field. Can he be someone that tips a pass, picks a pass off, is just kind of a problem in that area that the Niners want to exploit most in their passing game?
When I was talking to George and Eric the other day, they were saying that the big change defensively that the Chiefs used was they stopped depending on their linebackers to cover running backs. And they do not have elite linebackers. I don't think that is any secret. And so it comes down to who can make the plays the linebackers cannot. And that would be against the running backs. That would be against the guys who are going to run people over like George Kittle and Deebo Samuel. I think Tyrann Mathieu, and again, another star, I think he's going to play a pivotal role in this game. It's intriguing to see.
I think I was having, just when we talk about the Chiefs offense and, with, again, making the case for them, it's just that they have so many answers. I was talking to Joe Blymeyer today, who's the assistant quarterbacks coach.
I talked to him too. He's my media availability MVP so far.
He's great.
I love him.
He's great. We were chatting, and he was telling me how Andy Reid thinks about offense. And it was so interesting. He said that he thinks about route concepts in 3 different ways. The first is what does work against certain things. You have a coverage beater. A curl flat structurally makes sense. We've seen it happen a million times. The second thing is what should work. So it's one more step outside of that, where you're adding maybe 2 curls with the flat out of a certain look. And then the third one is what could work. So you're thinking about, all right, if I conceptualize something that has never really been done or I haven't seen done, theoretically, this should work. And I think both of these coaches offensively do such a good job of having solutions and thinking one step ahead of what they've already shown. And I think that is at the core of why the Chiefs are so hard to defend, because like you wrote today, you have someone constantly looking for them in Andy Reid, and you have someone that can constantly find them in every single way with Mahomes. And I do think that lies at the heart of why the Chiefs would win this game, is that they are unsolvable with those 2 guys.
Yeah, Mahomes has the second most open throws beyond the first down marker this year. Drew Brees is first, and that's a different phenomenon. I think that the marriage between Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes is important because he gives so many advantages to a quarterback who does not need advantages.
Exactly.
And that's the thing that we talked about, and that's why he's not Deshaun Watson, just struggling, to overcome the coaching staff around him. And that's funny to me because it almost reflects a little bit of like the marriage between Kyle Shanahan and George Kittle, which is no one finds space like Kyle Shanahan and no one uses space quite like George Kittle. There are so many things that just make perfect sense in this game, and that's why I love it.
Yeah, I'd be really curious to see what the Chiefs end up doing when it comes to man or zone against the Niners, because Shanahan is so good at understanding, like you just said, how to create space and understanding where the voids are. Do the Chiefs just line up and say, we're going to dare your receivers to beat us?
Yep.
I really don't know. This is a game where these offenses are so potent and so hard to stop when they're rolling that, like you said, how far outside of your normal tendencies do you go, because you don't necessarily trust that if you do what you've always done, it's going to be enough.
What do you think is the kind of, I know we don't want to talk about X factors here, but if you were to bet on the MVP, who are you thinking of right now? Like, are you thinking of a superstar?
Yes. I think if I was betting on the MVP, we'll get to our picks later, but I would pick the quarterback of the team I think is going to win. I think
even
that's always
if it's
the safest
Garoppolo.
thing. Yes.
Yeah.
It's hard not to win MVP as a quarterback.
You have to have, it's like a Deion Branch, Julian Edelman type of thing. You have to have a quarterback who didn't put up exceptional numbers.
If there's a guy who
Brady
maybe,
has 4, so I mean he's good. We're good on that.
let's say I think that Nick Bosa has a chance to have a big game.
Okay.
I don't think D Ford will, because I think D Ford is going to be on the left side going against Mitchell Schwartz the whole game. So if Nick Bosa gets 2.5 sacks and forces a fumble, that kind of thing, and we've seen that in the past, but I just think that the quarterbacks are probably the safest bet.
I
Like Von Miller won the
agree
Super Bowl MVP.
Yes.
That's a perfect example.
Yes, and the media tried to give it to Peyton. They just couldn't do it for his one 15-yard pass.
See, that the reason that I don't think it's going to be that sort of MVP is because I think there are going to be points. I think it's going to be a high-scoring game, and if it's a high-scoring game, I think that inevitably it's probably going to go to a quarterback.
I guess you're right. Can we give it to the coaches?
I honestly wish we could.
I'm gonna just put it down.
It is going to be a fascinating schematic matchup, and we've talked about it all week. And every time, as I've dug more and more, kind of into why I think that's the case, it's just so apparent. It's just when you think about all the layers that these guys have, and how when you think you figured out one thing, they're just going to do something else. It puts so much on the table for what we could see, and I think that's the best part about this.
What's the best conversation you've had this week with a player or coach from either of these teams?
It's a good question. I've had some really good ones. I've had some that weren't here, that were about Kyle Shanahan from players that he used to coach, that guys that he's been around in the past, and I think both of those were good. And I'll be writing about that for tomorrow. Just kind of the way he thinks about things and how he always seems to be a step ahead of everybody else. And just, Mike McDaniel told me something so interesting on media night. He said that when Kyle presents information to players, he understands that there's a limited attention span and that it's hard to keep their hold of them. So what he does is he tells a story where he'll start with a certain concept about why he's creating something, and then as he's building that concept out, he explains how it works, because this is what the outcomes are going to be. Mm-hmm. And I think that's so interesting. I think that really speaks to the way he thinks about the game. It's that if A, then B, if B, then C. All of these things are so intertwined that they can only exist because of each other. And that has really stuck with me. What would you say?
I honestly think the thing I'll remember about this week or the early week Kobe Bryant stuff.
Yeah.
And just the impact that he had around the league, and things from, again, George Kittle playing sports because of him, or Richard Sherman walking off his Achilles, things you don't even think about. And I actually thought it was interesting that Patrick Mahomes said that he liked hearing Kobe talk about things. And It reminded me a little bit of, I think the greats in any sport are dorks.
Yes.
Like true dyed-in-the-wool dorks. And even the guys you don't think are dorks are dorks. Guys like Tiger Woods, guys like, it was funny, I read one of Mike Tyson's books a couple of months ago, and he was talking about how he just basically would watch old fights from the 40s when he was 14 years old. And it's like, in order to get from I'm really talented to I'm one of the greatest in the history of the sport, you have to really want it. You have to really pursue kind of the context of things and wanting to see it. And I thought Patrick Mahomes talking about that was really interesting. It reminds me a little bit, Von Miller once told me that he studied Derek Thomas. And I said, what were you getting from Derek Thomas? And he's like, I actually don't care about the play part of it. He didn't care about watching Derek Thomas. Couldn't learn anything from that, although he did watch it. He wanted to hear him talk about how he approached it, because he felt like pass rushing is a mentality thing, and he just wanted to hear people talk about it. And Derek Thomas was the guy he glommed onto, and he said that one of the things Thomas said was that he felt like an offensive player, and Von Miller decided he was an offensive player playing defense, that kind of thing, right? And so anyway, back to the point of most interesting conversation I heard, it was the Mahomes talking about Kobe and how he just liked the perspective and taking it all in, and you can see it. And it kind of ties into what I was talking about earlier with Mahomes and just how much he appreciates this stage. And this is a superstar who I think we're learning a lot about. I think we've both been around him at various events, but I think that this is his coming out party for everyone. And I think that Mahomes is hugely famous, but I really think that when you go to a Super Bowl, it's on another level.
Absolutely.
And I think that that's coming out for Mahomes this year. Like, I don't know, I've said in the past, I kind of have a mom test where I say, what's my mom talking about? And there'll be, I don't think my mom knows who, Deshaun Watson is.
Sure.
I don't think, I think you need to get to the biggest stage in order for this to become a super duper duper star. And Mahomes is not only here, but he's embracing it.
Talking about mentality with Von Miller and Derek Thomas, I think it reminds me of something else that really stuck out to me this week. Talking to people around the Niners defense, just realizing how small the margins are between average and great in the NFL, and what sort of things have to change. Just the way that, adding Dee Ford and Nick Bosa unlocked the entire defensive line. How they changed the way they approached defensive line play. How Joe Woods coming in kind of streamlined the way that a lot of those defensive backs thought about the game and allowed them to play a little bit faster. You just see that on the Niners' entire defense. You just see a group playing cohesively, and it's allowed them to play extremely fast, extremely downhill, move around in a way they never have before because they have so much conviction in just the overall structure of the scheme and the personnel. That kind of stuff. It's just, you really do come to understand how small the differences are between a team that's going to win the Super Bowl and a team that's merely okay.
It's funny because when we talk about reverse engineering, I look at the Broncos as a team where you look back at them, the 2015 Broncos, and you say, oh, well, of course they won the Super Bowl. They had so many great parts, and we should have seen it coming, right? And when I think about, and so over the past couple of years, every time I look at the Super Bowl, I kind of try to reverse engineer it. Like, this is an old Sherlock Holmes thing where he says, like, anyone can see what's about to happen, but what you really want to do is take the result and work backwards. That's like true genius, and then you can get, Sherlock Holmes says it better than I do. I can't actually, I don't have it in front of me, I'm sorry. Take it with Arthur Conan Doyle. But I tried to reverse engineer and say, like, okay, in 3 years are we going to say, oh, this team had this guy, and this guy, of course they won the Super Bowl, right? Because that tends to happen. And I actually see a case in both situations. I actually see a case for both teams. Are we going to say, oh, of course, the Niners had a young Nick Bosa, and they had Dee Ford, and they had still in his prime Richard Sherman, and
or when
George
Kyle
Kittle
Shanahan ends up becoming Kyle Shanahan.
Exactly. And so I've been trying to figure out who's going to win via that route, and there's just so much talent and so many little edges on both sides that I'm having a hard time picking this game.
It's really difficult. And I think that I've changed my mind a dozen times as I've thought more about it and I've considered different details and all that stuff. But I do think I've landed in a certain spot, even if I don't feel good about it.
Are we doing it?
Let's do it. Who's going to win the Super Bowl, Kevin?
The San Francisco 49ers are going to win, and I'm upping it. We're going up. We're going 28-26.
I think it's like a 34-31 type game that the Niners end up winning. I think there's going to be a ton of points. I don't think either of these defenses are equipped to stop these offenses. I just feel like in the end, the Niners defense is going to make enough plays, especially up front. It's one strip sack. It's one hit that leads to an interception, the type of stuff that you don't often see against the Chiefs, but the Niners can do because of the talent that they have up front.
Now that we've both said this, the sound you hear is everyone betting the Chiefs.
Everyone betting the Chiefs, and the Chiefs winning by 4 touchdowns.
By 4 touchdowns.
Mahomes goes off. He throws for 500 yards. I'm going to go with Garoppolo just because I do think they're going to need to throw the ball to win, and I just think it's the safest bet. Quarterback of the team that wins.
George Kittle.
George Kittle. All right. We should look at the MVP odds. Long shot bets.
Yes.
George Kittle is 10-1. It's not that good of odds.
I wouldn't bet that.
It's not very good odds.
I'm not going to bet
Jimmy
that.
Garoppolo is plus 275. Plus 1,000 for George Kittle is not that great. My favorite one, I was so close once. I really do think that Cam Chancellor still was the MVP of that Super Bowl, and I picked him. He was like 100-1.
You should go to Vegas in that one and just make your case.
We should really re-legislate this. Kyle Juszczyk, plus 25,000. What would have to happen for Kyle
Jeff Schwartz? You seem stunned here. Jeff Schwartz has made the point that Juszczyk gets 200 yards rushing when everybody gets hurt.
All right, so the one I like in this group is actually Dee Ford. Plus 10,000 for Dee Ford is a bet I would make. Even though I said I think Bosa has a better chance, Bosa is plus 1,800 compared to 10,000 for Dee Ford. I don't think Dee Ford is 5 times less likely to win the MVP than Nick Bosa. That is the long shot bet I would like.
I actually think we should have asked Jeff Schwartz what the case to be made that his brother wins MVP.
He shuts down both
those guys, and they give it to him. Let's get the Mitchell Schwartz for MVP.
Listen, you don't have to tell you that. That's not something you got to twist my arm about. I'm more than willing to support that. I am also picking the Niners. Kevin is picking the Niners. So I hope everyone looks forward to a Kansas City Chiefs Super Bowl win on Sunday. As always, thank you so much for listening to the Ringer NFL show on the Ringer Podcast Network. We'll talk to you later.